only place for everything Vikings. 6, 1, 2, Vikings.
Welcome back to 612 Vikings. We are back for another episode. This time we have Thor from Purple Daily and Thor Talks Purple. I believe we haven't had you on the show yet. I think you are a first timer, and we're going to talk about some draft questions. But Thor, how are we doing on this fine Saturday afternoon?
I'm doing great, boys. We're only, 5 days from round one of the NFL draft. So I'm doing great. We're almost there.
Oh, yeah. I can't wait. Drew, how are you feeling?
Good. It's kind of a cool draft class, kind of interesting. Nothing I've really ever seen before. This new GM situation, kind of interim GM, something new I haven't really seen in my lifetime. So it'll be interesting to see what the Vikings do in this upcoming draft.
Yeah, for sure. So let's kind of get this started off here. So, Thor, we've been kind of looking at the Vikings draft here and kind of seeing what they're going to do at pick 18. Are they going to stick and pick? Are they going to move up or down? Things like that. And the most mocked player right now, I think, is Dylan Finneman. DT, a lot of people like to call him. Or would you like to do an option B? So, is Dylan Finneman a scheme fit? Is he someone that you're kind of looking for? Or do you think the Vikings go another direction in this draft?
I do think he's a scheme fit, and I do think he's going to be in discussion there depending on who falls down there. I don't think it's a lock outcome or anything, but I like the player a lot. Thieneman is 14th overall on my big board. Obviously, the Vikings sitting there at 18. It's a position of need. I do think he's a scheme fit, but I don't think they're going to get myopic with the safety position, and I don't think that they have to. If you're going to get myopic with any position, if you're the Vikings, it ought to be interior defensive lineman. That's the biggest need that team has. So you just see what ends up falling down there. It's not the greatest interior defensive line class as far as thinking of top 20 type consensus prospects. My first interior defensive lineman on my board, 23rd, Peter Woods. I have McDonald, the kid from Ohio State, at 29th. And then I have 4 or 5 of them in the second round. I think round 2 is probably the best spot for interior defensive line. So how do you drive that if you're the Vikings at 18? I think this is where some of the trade down stuff comes up. And I love that theoretical idea. The Vikings have more immediate need holes right now than they have picks in what is a down draft class. If you can pick up another day 2 pick by trading down, you're probably going to get another guy who comes in and immediately contributes, which the team desperately needs. But doing this for a job and going on all the different radio stations in Las Vegas and New York and all this stuff, every single show that you go on, they're like, hey, if our team X, if they had their druthers, they'd be trading down. Do you think that's realistic? Well, when there's 32 teams that want to trade down, it becomes a little bit difficult to trade down, right? Especially in this down draft class where you don't have as many sexy prospects. So what scenario is going to occur where some team high second round, late first round is going to be like, we have to pony up to move up to 18? I think that's sort of the 3-dimensional chess game you're playing right now.
Yeah, for sure. Drew, how are you feeling, sticking and picking or player-wise? How do you feel about the Vikings going about this?
Yeah, I think for me, I think with it being this interim GM situation, my opinion is that I think they're just going to play it safe and not try to get too cute unless there's a guy that's just fallen down the board like a Jeremiah Love's around early preteens, and maybe you kind of start seeing some moves. You can start thinking about it just because Kevin O'Connell wants that big time weapon on offense after kind of a shaky offensive season from last year. So I think that's really the only way I could see them really trading up. But other than that, I think it's going to be just sticking and picking, just kind of going chalk down their board and just going one piece at a time down the draft board, unless the team, is willing to trade up like Thor was saying earlier.
Sure. And then Thor too, kind of looking past the first round, the star of the show, are there some late round guys that Vikings fans should watch out for? I will be the first to admit I'm not a big college football guy. I don't know all the players, whoever is talked about on Twitter, that's who I kind of pump up and kind of look out for. But who are some late round guys that, most Vikings fans should look out for, maybe 5th through the 7th round?
Yeah, I mean, we could go, different positions, but one of them I'll toss out I have this guy 139 spots higher on my board than the consensus board, and I know the Vikings like him because they met with him during the pre-draft process, and that's Latrell McCutcheons Jr., the cornerback from Houston. He's a tall outside boundary cornerback who's fast, and I think he's an underrated player. That would be. I don't think, on the consensus board he's 291. So the consensus telling you he's going to be UDFA. He's not going to be a UDFA. He's going to get taken, and the Vikings maybe fifth round because they don't have a fourth round pick. Somewhere to look around there. Although I think that kid might go in the fourth. I like Renee Konga, is an interior defensive lineman from Louisville that I think is super underrated. He's another guy on the consensus board, is a UDFA that I think is going to be a mid round pick. You miss out on interior defensive. God forbid you miss out on interior defensive linemen the first 2 rounds. And I wouldn't suggest that. The Vikings have a big enough need there where, in my opinion, you have to take an interior defensive lineman in the first 2 rounds. Not necessarily the first, but if you don't, you're going to have to come back to that in the second round. But if you somehow miss that, Renee Konga is a guy in the later rounds, interior defensive lineman, again, that I think is super underrated. He creates havoc. He tested awesome. This process was like a 9.9 RAS. So that would be a guy that I would toss out there. But yeah, I mean, we could really go down positions. Every position, I think that there's guys that you can get at value later on.
Okay, awesome. So just kind of off script here too. Do you think that the Vikings go defense, offense in their first 3 picks?
I think it's too early to say that.
Okay.
Like I don't think they're going to box themselves in of like, this is what we're going to do in advance. That was one of the problems that I saw with Kwesi's decision making, is it seemed like in some drafts he had decided in advance, this is what we're going to do. And that's where you saw mistakes, like when Kyle Hamilton is available to your Jamison Williams, where you trade down because it's like, we have to acquire, more guys, whatever. And instead of getting $1, you traded it for 3 pennies, in essence, or whatever. So I think, to the point that you made before, they're going to try to play this thing more straight. I think take less, kind of be less cute, like you were saying. I would definitely anticipate that, but I do think it's too early. Like, the thing with like Thieneman becoming like that's just going to happen. Well, there's all sorts of possibilities where, I mean, even me, who's high on Thieneman, I would go a different direction. One of them, that has just started to get talked about just a little bit more here the last couple of days, but I love Jordan Tyson. I've always loved Jordan Tyson, and now Jordan Tyson has been cleared of his medical things. I said all spring, if he's cleared of his medical things, he's wide receiver 1. So when we got the reports that he's been cleared on his medical things, that's indeed what I switched him to on my board. If he ends up falling to 18, I think you have to have a serious discussion about that. That guy's 9 or 10 on my overall big board, Jordan Tyson. But there's, again, you just never know what happens during the draft, who's going to be available when you come up to pick. So I just wouldn't box myself in if I was in that building.
For sure.
Yeah, for sure. So I know you do a lot of draft analysis, and players know you're really notorious for your Thor 500, your 500 player big board. But kind of going post draft, what steps do you think the Vikings are going to look for in their general manager search? Because I know there's been talks about Rob Brzezinski kind of going in house, but there's also been some talks about some external hires. And then it looks like some of the reports are saying it's going to be about a 2-week search. So what do you think the Vikings are going to look for and the Wolves are going to look for when they're going for their general manager search? So more analytics based, more that football guy based, maybe a little bit of both. What do you think is going to happen after the draft?
Well, that's hard to say because they have set about on an unprecedented path here with the timing of the firing of their general manager, and then this weird interim thing through one off season, and then they say that they're going to do the hiring after the draft. And I think most people expect that to be right after the draft. That the timeline of that wasn't necessarily clarified. If I was what I would do, I would go back to the system of, you, the person we're hiring for this, you are the one with your name on all the personnel decisions. We're not doing this triangle of authority nonsense. We're not doing the hide the ball in the cup of where the decisions actually came from. Because that's the system the Vikings have now, is every mistake they make it is behind, it's obfuscated by so many levels of BS of, oh, well, he was reporting to this guy and the area scout. And then, you know what I mean? Like, you can't put one decision on one person, which makes it really difficult to have accountability. What I would like them to go back to, and I'm not saying Rick Spielman, we have a lot of fun with Rick Spielman, but a situation like that where you have an evaluator, someone who does his own process, who is responsible at the end of the day for those decisions, and everyone knows it, right? When that call is made, if it's a mistake, it's his fault. If it's a success, it's his credit. That's a system that I would go back to. But the Vikings, like I said, they're doing something we haven't really seen in the NFL before. So for me to speculate on what their GM search is going to be, I would be speculating on something we've never seen before. I'd be guessing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. It's just like it's unprecedented times, and I kind of found it interesting. You were saying like how everyone's like this triangle of authority, and it just kind of reminds me of like that Spider-Man meme where all they're like pointing at each other and blaming each other, like, oh, if this guy fails, it's your fault. It's your fault.
Exactly.
Everyone's pointing the finger at each other. So, like I said, I think it's just gonna be really interesting because. Like you said, we haven't really seen this before. Is this going to be like a stick and pick? Is Rob going to go balls to the wall and just start firing all these draft picks to go get like a guy like a Jeremiah Love or a Caleb Downs? Or is he going to play it safe? And because he is kind of auditioning for a general manager role himself. Just kind of like interim role, and it's something we've seen before, and it's not uncommon for interim guys to get some positions that they've kind of auditioned for in the past. So. But like I said, it'll be really interesting. It's kind of this weird, unprecedented times for sure.
Yeah, that's what it is. I see Rob B as he is merely just an extension of the ownership group. He is in there now to see through the prerogative of the ownership group for one-off season. And if the ownership group, they want to keep having a stronger influence on the personnel decisions that are made, that's when you would see the interim tag removed from Rob B. I actually don't think it has anything to do with like Rob B, like in a vacuum, his decisions. This is all the prerogative of the ownership group, and they decided obviously after the traditional timing with the GM of like, yeah, scrap this, get that guy out. We're going to send in the guy that we trust to see through our vision for one off season. And what that was reset the books, don't spend any money. You all screwed up last year. You torched a lot of our money. So we're not going to do that again. We're tightening the purse strings or whatever for one off season. We're going to reset the books, and then we're going to come back and reevaluate it at that time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So second to last question here too. So John McKay, I think, was a name kind of thrown out there too, part of the Rams and worked with Kevin O'Connell. If the Vikings don't go with Rob Brzezinski, I kind of have a tough time seeing them not, sticking with him, for the GM for the next year at least. But if they do decide that he's not the guy, could John McKay be an answer too?
And you're talking about because the relationship with O'Connell and how he's respected as a personnel. But I definitely get that, and that definitely makes sense. And the Rams, in addition, are one of the two most advanced organizations that we have right now as far as information gathering and synthesis of it. It's them and the Seahawks. You hear, and just the most hilarious things, like whispered to you. But like the thing with the Seahawks yesterday that came up, because there's always stuff with those two organizations. The thing where they figured out that Jackson Smith and Jigbo was wearing shoes that was a size and a half too big for his feet at Ohio State, and that's why he had hamstring issues. They have some kind of, I don't know, plyometric or some kind of, I'm not good with the terms, but where it does a body scan, and then it tells you the size of everything, whatever. But the Rams, they're really advanced with their systems, and in particular, they're the most notorious organization for not caring about the combine testing or the pre-draft testing. What they care about is the GPS data, and they have way more of it than I do, than we do. They have like really advanced systems that delve into how do you keep your momentum and your balance when you take a direct shot, different stuff like this, like again, stuff that we don't have. So all that stuff, it makes sense. The only thing with me where the timing might not make sense of that guy, let's say it's right after the draft, like people assume, and then they just hire that guy. The thing of it that wouldn't jive for me of it, and it has nothing to do with that guy or him being good at the job, whatever. It's you've decided with the timing that again that you elected as an organization, where you're going to do this hire, if you're going to do it in advance of the season, where you have a head coach that by definition is on the hot seat, right? I mean, it was O'Connell, it was Kwesi. They have fired Kwesi. The same administration, 4 years. You have 0 playoff wins. I don't know if you would project them to be winning a playoff game here in the 5th season coming up. If you're not happy with the personnel decisions and what you've seen over the last 4 years, O'Connell is on the hot seat as well. Well, you go into next year and it's a disaster season. What are you going to do now? You've hired O'Connell's friend as the GM, but now you're going to ask him to immediately fire him in the next fall, at the end of the next fall. I think, and again, the Vikings have boxed themselves into this, right? So I'm like the crisis counselor trying to help them with a problem of their own creation. But if I was them, what I would do, I would get through the next regular season or into it with Rob Brzezinski as the GM, and then I would go into a normal process with normal timing. The job search for this stuff, you typically find, identify, and then go out and attempt to hire your GM candidate right after the season's done, right? Well, that timing would also make sense for the Vikings because you would give O'Connell the 2025 season to see, are you the guy we're going to go forward with, where we trust you so much into the future, where we are essentially going to invert the typical process done in the NFL, where the GM picks the coach, and Kevin, we're going to allow you to pick the GM because that's how much job security you have, right? Or if things go wayward in 2025, well, now you can hire your GM first to go out and do the coaching search. That's how I do it.
For sure.
Yeah, I think, this will be our final question, but I think going into this draft, I know there's been some noise and some rumors going around about the Jonathan Grenard situation. And going back to last year's draft, we had a player trade getting Sam Howell. Is that something that we can maybe see? Is Jonathan Grenard still being on the move, or do you feel like he's going to be a guy that's going to stick around for this team for next year?
I would be surprised if we see a Grenard trade during the draft. I would think that would be something that you would want done in advance, in order to prep for it. We know that in that scheme, you need 3 good edge rushers, which they have right now, right? But if you trade, and you can do it, absolutely. But if you do it, you need to prioritize taking an edge rusher probably on day 2 of the draft. That's prep that I would want in advance. And you could say, well, what if, on the, after Thursday night, we have a long time on Friday till you get to day 2 of the draft. Like, could something be consummated then? I don't really know about that. If the stuff, I mean, because the Vikings have leverage here with Grenard. They're the ones that have Grenard under contract, right? It's the Grenard side that is attempting to wrestle some of that leverage back in the request or the demand, however you want to put that, of the contract extension with the raise, right? Well, if you're the Vikings, you don't need to trade him now. I would take it to camp. Right? And let's just see what happens then. And then if we're going to trade him, I would rather be trading Grenard for 2027 picks. It's the much better draft than 2026. So that's how I would do it. Just play it out, right? Like, see how the draft goes. See if there's teams that get desperate. You go a couple months in the future. Some of these teams that missed out on the edges, missed out on trading for edges, missed out in the draft on drafting an edge initially, right? They didn't get the guy they wanted. That's what I would wait, see if we can find a desperate team and or see if we can get back on the same page with Grenard and his representation.
For sure. So I think that's all that we got for you today, Thor. Thank you so much for popping on with us. We'll have to get you on again sometime, maybe after the draft too. Those of you that have not followed Thor on Twitter, make sure you guys do so. It'll be in the description as well. It'll be at ThorKU on X or Twitter, whatever you want to call it. So again, thank you so much, Thor, for joining us. We know you got to go and record some more podcasts and do what you got to do. So appreciate it a lot.
Thanks for having me, boys. Have fun the rest of draft season. We'll talk soon.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right, guys, we're on the second half of this episode. First half was obviously Thor did very well with the draft. I know close to nothing about a lot of the players in this draft. So it was good to kind of keep us updated with Thor. But we're going to kind of talk about some of the other players that, the Vikings could target with our friend Drew here and kind of see what's all out there and just kind of talk about some of those guys. So, Drew, let's kick us off here. I know there's a lot of good players out there. Maybe the Vikings take them, maybe they don't at pick 18, maybe they trade back, but kick us off here. What do you think? What do you think all happens? What do you want to talk about?
Yeah, I think it'd be interesting. I know everyone wants to be on the Dylan Thieneman train. Everyone's been hyping him up, mocking him to the Vikings. It's almost like it just seems too good to be true. It's almost like Thieneman to the Vikings is the same as Mendoza to the Raiders. Like everyone and their mom is mocking Thieneman to the Vikings, which I get because he's kind of a do-it-all safety. He's kind of like that Harrison Smith. But I think a very underrated position, I think a lot of people aren't really taking into consideration what could happen is the defensive tackle spot, and not necessarily the pass rushing spot, but I'm talking about the nose tackles, the big beefy boys at 330. We don't really have that, and I think that's something we've really been missing. Even like when we had Harrison Phillips, I mean, he was big, but he wasn't like beefy compared to like a Jordan Davis or like a Vita Vea, like somebody of that size. And there's a couple of players who are like that, and I think a couple of guys to look out for, potentially maybe in a potential second round if they were to trade back in the first round there, maybe like that late first round pick. I look at Caden McDonald, I think, is a guy who I think the Vikings could really, really love to have on this D line because you've already got the breakout with Jalen Redmond, and I don't think that's going to be going anywhere anytime soon. And you've got some play with Ingram Dawkins, and he's just kind of like this tweener guy. But you also got Levi Drake Rodriguez, who's shown some flashes. I think he's a good rotational piece more than anything. But I think with him. I'm talking about his exact measurements, but I think with a guy like that, he's at 326 at the combine, but that's close to 330, somewhere around there. But he's just this big, beefy guy, has these really big arms. I think it's a guy that could be a good run stuffer, and I think that's something the Vikings have really been missing. And I felt like a lot of times we've been kind of ran all over. And you're in a division with Josh Jacobs, Jahmyr Gibbs. The last year was David Montgomery, but now they've added Isaiah Pacheco. And the Bears were one of the best running offenses in the league last year, and I don't think that's changed from getting Ben Johnson. That philosophy hasn't changed from leaving Detroit. So I think getting that defensive tackle, getting it in the interior is going to be really, really important. Very overlooked need I think the Vikings have if they were to trade back. I think that's one guy, and I think the second guy that the Vikings could look at is Caleb Banks as well from Florida. I know he's been kind of this really polarizing player. He's either, kind of like this Lewis. I don't want to say Lewis Cine guy because I know that's going to ruffle some feathers from the Vikings fans. But like, people either loved him or hated him back then. I wasn't really a big Lewis Cine guy at the time. I remember when we drafted him. I remember I was like all excited. And I sat down. I was like, "Oh boy, here we go!" It's like, but I was like, "Okay, well, it's a 30-second."
I didn't even know who that was.
You got some picks out of it, so it wasn't like the end of the world. But he's kind of one of those guys. He's very boom or bust, but. He does have the talent to do it. He's got plenty of experience. He's 23 years old. At the combine, I believe he was at about the same size as Caleb McDonald, but he's 6'6" too, which could be really, really big too. So I think those are some guys that I would look for if they do trade back and they want to kind of kick the safety position to later, because there are some more safeties I think in those later rounds according to some of these mock drafts right now. There's like a Kamari Ramsey you can get. There's this LSU safety that's looking really nice. He's kind of flown up the draft board. So I think that could be a very interesting one come draft day if they were to kind of punt that safety position to later.
And then kind of switching over to offense, Kevin O'Connell's bread and butter per se. A underrated position that the Vikings should be kind of looking at. I wouldn't be surprised if they target this within the first 4 to 5 picks is – a center. We got Blake Brandel as center right now, our projected week 1 center. We had Ryan Kelly last year, didn't really work out. Brandel looked decent, throughout the season at center when he did have to play with Ryan Kelly out. But, a guy like Logan Jones, too, out of Iowa. Tell us about Logan Jones. I think the Iowa, Big Ten guys, I think you can't really go too wrong with a pick like that. So let us know what you think about Logan Jones.
Yeah, these I don't know what's in the water down at Iowa City, but they just breed NFL offensive linemen, and it comes in all rounds. If you go to like Alaric Jackson from the Rams, he's at left tackle. I think he was like a 7th round pick or the late day 3 pick, and he's worked out pretty well. And then you go to like Tristan Wirfs in the first round, then you go Brandon Scherf, early guard, was tackle, got moved to guard in the NFL. did really well in the NFL for his career that he had. So they just live and breathe, and they just send out offensive linemen. So I think with it being the center position, I think that is something you got to target in this draft. I know there's a lot of Brandel love. He had a really good season as a rotational piece and really stepped up when you needed him to. But I think there's more value in Brandel playing all 5 positions as a backup, as a swing at each and every position when you need him to play that, than it is to just pigeon corner him at one position, make him a starter. So, and they already let go of Justin School. You got Walter Rouse, who can be like that swing tackle kind of guy. So you can put him in as a swing guard and play as a backup center. And you also got Michael Juergens there too. So I think if you were to just draft a center straight up in this upcoming draft, you could probably get away with 8 offensive linemen on the initial 53, which opens up another spot, whether that's on defense or offense at a premium position there. So, and then, like I said, you can move guys up and down the practice squad, but I think having that much versatility on the O-line is going to be really, really big for the Vikings to come up really clutch for them.
Yeah, for sure. And then kind of looking at running back too, I know a lot of Vikings fans were on the train of Jeremiah Love from Notre Dame. But another guy, another homegrown guy too, is Emmett Johnson out of Nebraska. I think he was born and raised in Minnesota. I think he's a Vikings fan. I didn't do that much research on him, but it sounds like he's a pretty good running back. Emmett Johnson, what's his skill set like? How would he fit in this Kevin O'Connell offense? What does he kind of look like?
Yeah, he's a 22-year-old running back. He'll be 23 by the time that mid-season kind of starts. But he didn't run the most electrifying 40-yard times, compared to like a Jahmyr Gibbs. So he's not a guy that's going to run you out of the building with his speed alone. But I think he could be an all-around back. I think he's a guy that could kind of be like that Aaron Jones era, where he starts off maybe as the RB3 to start the year. They'll probably roll out Jones, Mason to start the year, but he also gives you depth there in case Jones does go down, because he has had the history of not always staying healthy. He came up really big in 24 with his health, but he's a guy I feel like that can kind of play all the different positions, like running back wise. He can go out in the backfield, he can catch, he can run on the inside zone. So very, very similar to Aaron Jones, and I think that's why you're starting to see a lot of the Vikings, front office really do a lot of homework on him, just because you could have that mentor relationship between Emmett Johnson and Aaron Jones.
Mm-hmm. For sure. So is there any other guys you kind of keep an eye on, whether that's at pick 18 or, just some pipeline dreams that you have, who are some other guys you can give us a name of and just kind of, keep our ears perked about?
Yeah, I know a lot of people are really big fans of Jeremiah Love, which we'll see what happens. I know running back is always the weird one right now. I know a lot of people are saying Tennessee for Jeremiah Love, and I get it. He's a blue chip guy. But I start to think, I'm like, dude, does Tennessee really need Jeremiah Love? I mean, you already got, Tajay Spears, who's solid RB2. You got Tony Pollard, and maybe he's getting a little older, and you want to just get the guy now and just kind of breed him and go. I mean, maybe that's the possibility, but I really think next year's class is so much better for running back than this year's class, because maybe it's just one of those things where Tennessee's like, hey, we'll just get the blue chip guy now. We're already here. This could be a guy that can transcend our offense and get going right out of the gates. But, maybe they're just tired of always picking top 5, top, 3 or whatever they're picking at. But I think it's more wiser to kind of – I think you're going to see a lot of these running backs kind of fall in the draft, just because I think a lot of teams are prepping for that 27 class, just like how they were for the 25 class, where you had like guys like Dylan Sampson and Quidshot Judkins and Travion Henderson, all these other backs that were taken and have shown they've done pretty well so far. But next year, you got Kawan Lacey, you've got Ahmad Hardy. I mean, those are two of the best running backs from the country last year. I mean, they probably you can even make the case they had better seasons than Jeremiah Love. And I know Jeremiah Love didn't have a lot of the quarterback help compared to some of those other ones, but and Ahmad Hardy really was just carrying that Mizzou offense, where Quan Lacey had a lot more balance to the teams, I would say. They really made that run in the college football playoffs, especially with him really being the lead guy, like the workhorse guy for them. So, but I think I would be kind of weary if I'm Tennessee. It's something like I would kind of be like, maybe wait and see on, but I would expect him, again, I'm just expecting him to go forward, plan for worst case scenario moving forward. I think that's one, but I know it's another guy. There's Dante Corleone from Cincinnati. He's put up some really good years up at Cincinnati, really under the radar, kind of an undersized guy. We've heard that before with a certain Cincinnati player that worked out pretty well, especially with being a UDFA and Ivan Pace. But I think that could be another guy that the Vikings could potentially try to sneak in and try to, bring in as a underrated player. Especially with I think there is some overlap with Pace and Corleone. I think Pace was a little bit older. I think Corleone was a little bit younger, but there might be some overlap there. But I think that's another guy you could potentially look at too.
For sure. Well, before we end this episode, is there anything else that you would like to let our viewers know about this 2026 NFL draft in Pittsburgh?
Yeah, I think that, like I said, this is going to have to be the draft where you're setting yourself up for, years to come. And, I know everyone says it's a make or break draft. There's some teams it really is, but I think this is one where this is going to set up the case for the Vikings if they're going to be picking in the top 10 in the years to come, or if they're going to be middle of the pack, or they're going to be picking in the back end. I think this is going to be a really transcendent Vikings class moving forward, just because the roster is starting to age out, like Harrison Smith, Van Ginkel's, over the hill at 30 years old. How many years does he have left? Aaron Jones is starting to get there in age. So some of these transcendent guys you've signed in free agency or you've drafted from years ago are starting to age out. So it's going to be interesting to see how well this team is really going to draft. And like we were saying with Thor earlier, this is a very unprecedented draft. So I'm trying not to get my hopes up, but they're going to pull some rabbit out of the hat where right when you think they're going to start to suck and things are really going to start to really turn for the worse, they'll pull out some 14-win magical season like they did in 17 and 24. So, I mean, if you're an optimist,
this is the year. It's an odd year.
But I know you were calling and we were on the car ride back. You're like, I feel like the Vikings are going to have a really good year this year. And, I was just like, oh, they're going to be like a 6 to 7 win team with Sam Darnold. You're like, I think they'll win like 10 or 11 games. And then they won 14 after that. So,
yeah, we were both wrong.
Yeah, there is some optimism, with this team in this upcoming season. I think the big thing that you're looking for the optimists is that you were a 9-8 team with JJ McCarthy, Carson Wentz, Max Brosmer, and Mike Grandma being the quarterback, and they still won 9 games out of that. And if you just had some sort of consistency there, I mean, they were kickoff return away against the Bears from winning this division. So it isn't that far-fetched to think like the Vikings are just right there, but you got to get more talent so that way when those times come where you got to have those plays, those got to have it moments, those guys come through for you at the end. And I think that's what we've really have seen from those 24 seasons and those 22 seasons is those players did step up and had those got to have it plays, like the Shaq Griffin interception on Kyler Murray in the Cardinals game on that massive comeback, or, the Justin Jefferson one-handed catch against a Buffalo Bills team on the road. So I think that's really just going to be the thing is they got to get some guys who really step up in those moments. I think they've got the talent, but they've got to step up when the time's right.
Yeah, for sure. And we'll see how this goes. Like Thor said, we got about 5 days and we will be at the real thing. So with that said, this will be the end of this episode, guys. Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe if you guys are watching on YouTube. If you are on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, make sure you guys rate us and follow us on there as well, along with our Twitter X account as well. So we'll see you guys probably after the draft. We'll kind of talk about, what we like, don't like, and maybe we'll have another special guest on the show, kind of talk about the same things as well. So thank you guys for listening and watching. We will see you guys in the next video. Skol Vikes.